It's a good day, right?
Yep.
All
And
right,
to be a
and the
panelist on
recording
the top.
has started. And I will turn it over to Jessica.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to November. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm the Interim Director of Workforce Strategy. As your workforce strategy team, our regional consultants work monthly to bring you relevant and up to date strategies on all things workforce. Today's topic is focused on recruiting, retaining, and creating a culture of inclusion for our American Indian workforce. As in previous months, we are excited to learn from our panelists today who understand the needs of this talent pool and serve them and their families. We are really, really excited that they are with us today and that you're with us today. Our consultants work regionally, which means that each consultant will have a slightly different way that they do their work based on the region and the employers that they serve in those regions. But the common core ways that we support our employers are identified on this slide here. We work with you to identify gaps in your current strategies, ensure that you are connected with your local, regional, and state workforce partners, and we assist you in building strategies that will help you attract and retain workforce. When you work with us, you are automatically connected to a wide network of people and partners who work collaboratively for the success of our state, our regions, our communities, so that your business and our workforce. We do not do this work alone. It takes many people and partners to bring success to these efforts. If you are new here today, thank you so much for joining us. If you're returning, thank you for joining us again. Our session will go today until noon, after which we'll segue into our 30-minute unplugged portion of the event where we invite you to on your camera yourself and ask questions of our panelists as well as our team of strategy consultants verbally or through chat, whatever you with. I would also like to take a moment to encourage you to fill out the evaluation at the end of our time here together. We'll get that link in the chat a few times today so that you don't lose sight of it. It's just really important for us to learn from you what works, what doesn't work, and what you want to see more of. We also want to share your success and highlight your business too. So there's a place in that evaluation for you to identify yourself if you are interested in having your business be highlighted blog or through by being a presenter or panelist sessions here today. Finally, to kick things off, I would love you to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't done so already, letting us know your name and your title and what business that you are working with. We also invite you to add your questions in the chat throughout the sessions. Don't hesitate to add your thoughts throughout, and we'll get to them when we are able. And that goes for cool things you're doing in this space too. We would love to know what you're doing. As always, these webinars are recorded and available to view at any time via YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as our queerforcemn.com website, where you will find recordings of all of our previous sessions as well as resources. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to James World Soldier, our Northwest Strategy Consultant. Hey, James.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thanks for that warm introduction. This is such an exciting day. This is the first Workforce Wednesday that I'm facilitating, and so I'm very excited to have this opportunity. And happy American Indian and Alaska Native Heritage Month, everybody. Thanks for, again, joining us for this Workforce Wednesday. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a workforce strategy, specifically as it applies to recruiting underrepresented populations, or minoritized employees, we can talk about actual strategies that are used by actual companies in our regions. We can talk about real results, quantifiable results when we're talking about this sort of thing. So for example, we're talking about recruiting with DEI. We can talk about how Caterpillar actively recruits high functioning adults from the autism spectrum for inventory roles, for example. We can talk about how Aldevron, right, will actively recruit people from the same pool of employees for lab sterilization and lab preparation roles. Both these organizations recognize that these are the most qualified recruits because they're on the spectrum. They understand that the spectrum places them at a competitive advantage for certain roles, and because of that, they seek them out and actively recruit from them. When we talk about recruiting with DEI, we can talk about how Cardinal IG actively recruits and celebrates new Americans. They're a very important part of what Cardinal does with their strategy and their operations, and Cardinal absolutely lets them know about that. In fact, Cardinal is often the only organization in town that gives new Americans a chance in spite of experience and a stellar resume. Some of these individuals go on to be lawyers and authors, consultants, pharmacists, and so on, and other professionals who only got their first chance because of Cardinal IG. So we see the same story unfold across our state from different organizations and different minoritized groups. We see people actively working to recruit, again, these populations that they consider to be a competitive advantage for whatever reason. So when I started my research for today, our goal was to highlight real strategies used to be more inclusive of Native people. I mean, this is a population that grew by 86.5% between 2010 and 2020. So we know this is a growing labor force. But we also wanted to discuss what an employer of choice for Native people would look like and how one could start building this culture. When you look at the data that focuses on Indigenous workforce in Minnesota, we've seen a large increase in the American Indian workforce participation rate from 2014 to 2019. Specifically, when you look at specifically and especially when you look at other demographic groups. But we also see that American Indian employment numbers have not bounced back from COVID like we have seen from other demographics. Primarily, they associate this with how hard hit the casinos were. And so we can see um, also that the American Indian population grew quite a bit compared to the white and other ethnicities. This data tells us that the population isn't working as much as they did before COVID. And we also see this trend of consistently increasing employment that was stalled by COVID. Once the casinos return to those pre-COVID statuses, we might see these workforce numbers line back up with this trend. Regardless, actively recruiting from this population could garner some great results, especially if an organization works to develop and understand the Native communities and the culture of inclusiveness for Native people. So what are we going to look at today? If you've been to Workforce Wednesdays before, you know how this will work. We've invited 3 subject matter experts whose work impacts the economic development and prosperity of Minnesota to talk to us about what it would take to be an employer of choice for Indigenous Minnesotans. At about noon, like we mentioned, we'll turn it over to Jessica O'Brien, who will invite you to ask questions to our guests, or even now you can start putting them in chat and we'll make sure that they get asked for you. Let's go ahead and take a moment and meet our speakers. So to speak on this idea of how to be an employer of choice for Native people, we've invited 3 panelists who have worked to bridge cultures and developed programs to support businesses, diversity, and inclusion. First, we would like to introduce Dr. Mitchell Berg. We originally scheduled Kirk Croshew to join us for this conversation, but he had an unexpected business engagement that came up, and so he invited Dr. Berg to come talk to us, and we couldn't be happier. Dr. Berg is definitely a subject matter expert in this space, and we're happy to have him. He's an associate director at the University of Minnesota Crookston Veeden Center for Rural Development. I hope I pronounced that right, Mr. Berg. He's also on several boards, including but not limited to Rethos, which is the state's Main Street entity, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, a Minnesota American Planning Association. Additionally, Dr. Berg teaches public administration at Bemidji State University and is a self-proclaimed recovering city administrator, having served 15 plus years in that local government profession and working for 8+ years of those years as the city administrator for the city of Mahnomen, which is located entirely within the boundary of the White Earth Nation, the largest of Minnesota's 11 tribal nations. He completed his PhD at Hamline University in 2019, having defended his dissertation on promoting tribal city-county relationships. Next, we are honored to have Hannah Smith. Hannah Smith currently serves as the Region 5 Development Commission JEDI Fellow. Again, JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Hannah's work contributes to the Equitable Economic Ecosystems Initiative and Region 5's Community Workforce Inclusion Council. It's that council, the QUIC, that works with businesses to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies to resolve workforce challenges. And last but not least, we have Mr. Raymond Duha. Raymond is a U.S. Navy veteran and is the Director of Veterans Employment Services at the state of Minnesota. I feel that Ray's contribution to this conversation is especially important because just like all of us, Indigenous culture, like Indigenous people, are not monolithic. And broadening our thinking and scope instead of focusing on one single aspect of an individual can provide opportunities where we can make an even more strategic impact. I reference Venn diagrams a lot. And when we think about people as those Venn diagrams, we can really kind of come into that specific area where that marketing can be effective. So before we start with the questions, I wanted to give about 5 minutes to every panelist to just kind of talk about who they are, give maybe a better definition of their role, and why this topic is important to them. So Dr. Berg, I'd like to start with you. Would you please take a few minutes and tell us about your role at the University of Minnesota Crookston and how you support Native people and businesses?
Sure, I'd be very happy to. And James, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I really have to be the first to admit I am neither Native, and so it's always a great honor to be invited into a space like this to talk about this. I have, as you had announced, served 8+ years as city minister for the White Earth Nation, or within the White Earth Nation, working for the city of Mahnomen. City of Mahnomen is a statutory city, is one of 5 statutory cities located within the exterior boundary of the White Earth Nation. This makes a very unique, uh, just it, it, it is unique to any other community really in Minnesota because it's a statutory city located entirely within the sovereign boundary of the reservation. And we'll talk a little bit about what sovereignty means to tribal people later. But so I've had, and I did that. I worked in White Earth from 2007 to 2009, and then did my dissertation or started my doctorate on working with tribes, cities, and counties. And so I came back to Mahnomen to serve out as city minister again from 2015 to 2021. And so not only have I have this on and off 15 years of relationships with the White Earth Nation, but with really the 10 other tribal nations in Minnesota. So coming to UMC was a really a natural fit. This Vadine Center for Rural Development really is about bridging and connecting. So if there are entities such as employers, so it's not just governments, be it tribal governments, cities, counties. It might be employers that want to network either for workforce solutions, be it applied or engaged research, or if they want to interact with our faculty for experiential projects, you can come to me. And even though I'm primarily focused within the Northwest region of Northwest Minnesota, I can also interact with the entire university system. As an example is through extension. We are also the university center. So we received a 5-year EDA grant to do much what RDCs do in supporting and growing the workforce and local economy of Minnesota. We're here to help do that. In this case, though, unlike the RDCs, through the universities. So some of the projects that I've been able to work together on has been, we're piloting a project with Red Lake, White Earth, and Fond du Lac Nation to put together a guide to help American Indian entrepreneurs who want to start a business within Indian country. Opening up a business can be a challenge, in itself. There are unique challenges to opening up a business on a sovereign nation. And so, being able to provide some help for American Indian entrepreneurs, that's our goal, is to really reduce that amount of time where when people have questions, we hopefully can point them to the right direction through this guide. Dee's a big part of that. Kirk Croshoe is kind of on our partnership team on that. We've got obviously the economic development planners from Red Lake, White Earth, Fond du Lac, but we've also got other partners with Extension, with the Northwest Minnesota Foundation, the Small Business Development Center, and so many more people. And so we're really excited. We've had some focus group discussions with AI entrepreneurs to really ask them what barriers did they encounter, what assistance would they like to see in some sort of guide being created. And then we've also reached out to the actual tribes themselves to hear and glean what common questions do they get from entrepreneurs that want to open up a business within the boundaries of their reservations. We've also done some other work with, I'm having some discussions with 2 tribes in workforce development, extension prior to me coming on board to the healthcare study and the spending on healthcare within the 3 tribes that surround the Northwest Indian CDC region. So that would be Red Lake, White Earth, and Leech Lake. And working with that, working a lot with WETCC and the schools within White Earth to also explore workforce development and career pathways. I got a lot to say. Sorry about that, but I could go on, but I think I'll pause right there. Thank you.
I think that's great. Thank you so much. And I think we'll have some questions regarding that entrepreneurship program, maybe ways for us to get involved and support it. But we'll ask those questions a little bit later. Hannah, if we could go to you. Hannah, like Ray, you're in a unique position to discuss this topic from a few intersections. Can you talk to us a little bit about your work as the first Jedi Fellow for Region 5 Development Commission, and also why this topic resonates with you?
Yeah, definitely. So Buju, hello, my name is Hannah, Ajijacandudem, Gawababa Ginakagash Konaganing and Dinjaba. So I'm currently in Mankato today. I live in Duluth and then I work remotely for Region 5, which is North Central Minnesota. And I am the new Jedi Fellow. So I've been on, let's see, year 11, 6 months at Region 5 as the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Fellow. And it's a great team that spans different sectors of our community. And I think that, and we can get into this later, I think that diversity is really important for a number of reasons. We're facing new 21st century issues, and the way that we find solutions is together, and the more voices at the table, the better the solutions are going to be and the more sustainable our solutions are going to be. So that is me, and we'll get into some of the details later. You.
Well, can I catch you off guard with one question before we move on to Ray?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, the adding the J to the diversity, equity, and inclusion letter formula is something that's a little bit new, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think drove adding that as a factor in this work?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I don't fully understand what that looks like in the near future and the far future, but I appreciate the efforts put into adding justice to diversity work, because there is that layer of historic, systematic injustices that have been happening. So as we talk about solutions in the future, talking about justice is definitely needed.
That's great. So it's almost like a micro and macro thing. We can talk about justice on like a individual level, but also I think what you're saying is even like just an institutionalized systemic level.
Yeah, and it's hard to think about those big historic ongoing issues and then doing day to day in my position as a Jedi Fellow, and how we interpret that in the community and then what that looks like in practice.
Interesting. Yeah. So it'll be an evolving science that we'll be able to kind of watch and measure its impact on organizations and on people, communities. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Raymond, thank you so much for your service with the U.S. Navy, first and foremost. You and I have talked a lot about how our American Indian neighbors in Minnesota have the highest share of vets compared to other minoritized groups. That's 5% for Native peoples, and the importance of that military service plays in Indigenous culture. Um, your work brings you in contact with the intersection of two historically underemployed groups, Ray. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why your service to these specific groups is so important?
Thanks for inviting me, James. And I know we have a tight schedule, but do you want me to go through the slides or I can give you a
Yeah.
quick overview? All right, good. First off, served the United States Navy, and I served with many American Indians. We deployed together. We were brothers, sisters, and we were all united under the flag to support our nation and our freedom and our way of life. And no one faltered, no one, all of us are united, and I love that. I love that camaraderie. When we stand at attention and you look around, you see we're all different. We did come from different walks of life, and we love our country, we love our land, and we love our people. And when we come back home, we continue to serve. And many of you here with me, colleagues, and those who are attending, you served. Thank you for your service. Next week is Veterans Day, so thank you to you, to your families, to your neighbors, anyone that you're connected to that served our country. Please extend our gratitude to them. I'm Ray Duha, U.S. Navy veteran. I joined DEED in 2008. I'm the Director of Veteran Services. This program is funded by Department of Labor Jobs for Veterans State Grant. This grant allows us to hire two categories of staff. The first category are called Veterans Employment Specialists. Basically, they're case managers who work one-on-one with veterans experiencing significant barriers to employment. We also have a focus on serving our American Indian veterans, and we provide them with intensive services to help them and empower them to receive great resources and employment. The next category of staff is local veterans employment representatives. Basically, they're business reps. They work one-on-one with employers. They entice them to recruit, hire, and retain veterans. Next slide, please. So why hire veterans, and specifically American Indian veterans? And a long time ago, the employers, and some of them are here, they recognize that U.S. military veterans represent an important ready talent pool. We come home and we're loaded with knowledge and experience. And take a look on either side, you'll see how what the employer is looking for versus what the veteran brings to the table. There's that connection right there. And we know that in addition to being highly trained, veterans are steeped in collaboration, mission, purpose. They represent a wide, if you hire veterans, you're already hitting into the DEI, diverse population. So the veterans come from diverse background, ethnicities. They have abilities, experiences, uh, brings all of which bring immeasurable richness to your organization. And they join following, basically they leave the military one mission and they latch on the next mission. So when you hire a veteran, it's a win-win for you. Next slide, please. I apologize for going fast, so we can allow time for a good discussion. So as I mentioned earlier, we have case managers. We call them veterans employment specialists. This is what they do. They work one-on-one with those veterans who have experienced severe and significant barriers to employment, and we provide that case management, and we work with them one-on-one until they reach their goal. And we have good connections with communities and wraparound services, and we receive and provide referrals to our partners at the federal, local, and state governments as well. Next slide, please. For employers, this slide is particularly very important. Why? Because this is your point of contact. These are the ones that we're going to work with you to invite you to job fairs, to work with you to provide outreach, workshops, to coordinate efforts, to talk to you about credentialing, licensing. There's many things they do to help you reap the benefits of hiring veterans. Workers tax credit, for example, apprenticeship programs. And if you're looking for talent, as we all are doing right now, we're seeking new employees, and it's very difficult. Working with a local veterans employment rep is a ticket. because now we can tap into talents and overlook talents, and we can reach a talent pool that we can funnel into your company. So I'll share with you a link so you can get in touch with one of our representatives. Next slide, please. This is what we do. We provide employment services to the veterans and to the employers. We are part of the wide community, which called Yellow Ribbon, was established back in 2006. We're connected with a lot of regions, with housing, justice involved, federal VA, state VA. There's many players here that play to make sure our service members, Native American veterans, all of them are supported in all the locations. These are the projects that we do at Career Force Veterans. Homeless veterans, Native American women veterans, justice involved, and we have specific staff to take care of all those projects because we know that these are the folks that need us the most, and we need to focus our efforts in providing them the utmost respect by providing them great and excellent service. Next slide, please. Wanted to highlight this picture. And you'll see Assistant Secretary of Labor. He came here, visited one of our locations, and we sat down and there was a drum circle, and I have never done that before. And when I sat down and I played the drum along with our commissioner, and Kirk Crosher is on the other side, that was one of the most beautiful feelings I've ever felt in my life. It was not me at one point hitting the drum, it was somebody else. I felt like I was taken to a different dimension because there's that huge respect that I have for the Native Americans, and also the drum circle is such an empowering, and it brings people together. And when you play the drum, you see it over there in front of you, that's one thing, but when you're actually doing it right next to you, others are from the local area. They're singing and they're doing that, and I felt a huge endearment. And I want to tell you that I really appreciated that experience, and I encourage the employers to learn more about that. How can you incorporate some cultural things into your company? How can you identify those from the tribal areas, from the Native American background, and honor their culture and bring them and highlight it, and doing a drum circle in your office like we did. There was our Assistant Secretary of Labor. He didn't plan for it, but we made him sit down, and he picked up the instrument and started playing, and he loved it. And to this day, he speaks highly of it. So I don't want to go too much in that, but I just want to say that commitment is one thing and doing it is one thing. So we have to put them together, commit it and do it, and stand in front for your company to make sure you honor the veterans and Native American veterans and all the groups in your company. To honor them is to understand and respect their culture. Next slide, please. I don't want to read them all, but you can see in this slide how significant the contribution of Native Americans in the military. It's significant. Honor, duty, love for the country, love for the land is just amazing what they do. And same thing, when you hire them, it's exactly the same thing. There's that spirit of respect. There's that spirit of dedication. So hiring Native American veterans is great, is awesome, is wonderful for your company to enrich your group and bring that culture into your fold. And I think you see what they do, what they have been doing for over 200 years. So I'm very honored to work with them and know them and have served with them. Next slide, please. This is our contact information. If you have a question, please drop us a line, send us an email at veterans.careerforce@state.mn.us. Also visit our website. We have some great resources there, and you'll find our vet reps so you can connect with them. We are veterans helping veterans, and that's who we are. And I look forward to working with you all. I think that's the last slide. The next slide is just my info. And I look forward to connecting with you all. And if you have any questions, please here's my cell phone and my email. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Over back to you, James.
Great, thank you so much. That was really great. Yeah, now we're entering into the part of the presentation where we'll ask a few questions of our panelists. I'll just go, I'll start with you, Mitch, and then go to Hannah, and then Ray, and then Mitch, Hannah, Ray. We'll get through as many questions as we can, and then we'll open it up for all of you during our Unplugged session with Jessica. So if we can start with you, please, Dr. Berg. One thing that we discuss a lot that seems to go hand in hand is the differentiation between reservation Indian experiences versus urban Indian experiences. And even on a data or a statistical level, there seems to be a differentiator there. So for example, when we talk about increases in population, we can say from 2010 to 2020, the American Indian population grew by about 327.5% for the 7-county metro area compared to 12.7%, and 17.5% in greater Minnesota compared to 4.5% for all the other races. But there's that distinction that's made between that urban experience versus a reservation experience. Do you mind talking about that for just a few minutes so that recruiters kind of understand the difference there?
Sure. And I'll be brutally honest, I am not an expert on this particular question, but I can just give you some of my anecdotal observations, having worked again up in White for the past 15 years off and on. And I did get to work in one of my very first jobs right out of college. I got to work with the project manager to get that Sears building redesigned to what it is today. And so it's been fabulous for me to work with folks in the Phillips neighborhood. And I just am so excited that, that area has been just so transformed. But one of the things that I've kind of seen and observed is, there is a lot of mobility within Native communities. And so you see a very, I say, direct pipeline between the Twin Cities to, at least with White Earth, people, families moving back and forth. In some cases, multiple times, where even a student might go, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And so, I think as an employer, you might want to understand that and be, of course, cognizant of that. I also think that, when you look at the reservation experience, we there are, dedicated services. And so, again, with White Earth, they really made it a point to decentralize their services within their tribal villages. And, when you're maybe in the Twin Cities area, those services might be a little defragmented. I have, in fact, a district rep that asked me for connections to the different agencies that are down in Twin Cities. And so that just kind of highlights that example of that disconnection, where you have, and of course he does know, because White Earth does have, and so does Red Lake, and I know many of the other tribal nations do have, they call them embassies, right? So they're portals for Native Americans that are enrolled or descendants to get direct services for those tribal from their tribes directly if they live in Twin Cities. But so often, with enrollment and or with blood quantum, of course, we have mixed to to all sorts of just of diversity within the American Indian community, I guess is what I want to say. Where if you're a blended family, for instance, getting service from one area is okay, but then if I'm not a member of that tribal nation, how do I get services? And so, and you do have that to some extent up in the tribal nations, but I think it creates a unique is uniquely different when you're in the Twin Cities area.
And you know, probably a lot of those services just aren't available. Maybe if we get time, we can come back around and talk about blood quanta. That wasn't something that we were going to talk about, but I think Hannah might have some good points to talk about that too, just with regard to, I know the White Earth has had some news recently on that topic, and it'd be interesting to hear people's perspective on that, and just maybe how services are limited because of that kind of that unique way of defining whether one is indigenous or not.
Sure, and if you would like, I can just briefly talk about that. Or
Sure, that'd be great.
Later. Okay,
Absolutely.
so for those that are unfamiliar with blood quantum, is basically it was a way to exterminate Native Americans. The MCT, which is Minnesota Chippewa tribe, is composed of 6 tribal nations, 6 of the 7 Ojibwe nations in Minnesota. And they had adopted this blood quantum, which basically states that you have to be 25% of that tribe in order to be deemed a member. And so obviously, you know, we have family members, which, you know, we had a tribal chairman. His own 2 kids couldn't vote for him because they didn't have the right amount of blood quantum. And so that dilutes, obviously, due to marriage outside of the tribe, you know, with other, you know, non-Native people even. And so that has shrunk the membership base to the point where, you know, they had projected, I think, in about 40 to 50 years, White Earth being, again, the largest tribal nation at about 18,500 members, will shrink to about less than 3,500 members in about 40 years. There is a Wilder Foundation study that perhaps, Darla, if you can find that link, you can put that in the chat. But it's a really foretelling story about what will happen if this blood quantum does not change. And so the MCT is studying to look at a constitutional revision that would look at really a couple of things. One would be to change the blood quantum. Another might be to allow the tribal nations themselves to delineate how they determine who's a member. They've also looked at lineage. They've looked at a whole bunch of different options. But I will defer that, as you said, James, maybe Hannah, if she has any greater insight.
It's such an interesting topic. You know, even when we're talking about data that we get from Deed and Anthony Schaffhauser is my labor market analyst, that data is oftentimes skewed or inaccurate because, you know, when you're doing equal opportunity work, you're looking, you know, when they count Native American or American Indian, Alaska Natives, those are people that are just that, right? That doesn't include 2 or more races, or again, you bring in blood quantum. You might have someone that's inundated in that culture, but can't include themselves as part of that culture because they have their lineage, right? And so I think that'll be really interesting moving forward, and just seeing how the reservation systems and the nations try to adjust and survive based on that antiquated policy. So Hannah, if we could jump to you, please. I don't know if you want to touch base on that, the blood quantum conversation, but otherwise, I know, you know, one thing that you and I talk about a lot is the idea of language, and how language can be a real powerful device or tool for inclusion. And, you know, you and I had a really great conversation the other day just about some of the language that's used in workplaces and so forth. And would you mind kind of just introducing that idea and talking about it with the group?
Yeah, I do want to take a second to talk about blood quantum. It's a big topic, and there's a lot of layers to it. And I think it is one of those indicators, or maybe one of those barriers of talking about recruitment and understanding Indigenous communities and understanding the spectrum of Indigenous identity, and the complexities that go around what it means to be Native American in the 20th and 21st century, because it's changed a lot. And I think perspectives and individual pushes on how different people on like this wide spectrum of like, what does it mean to be Indigenous? And then blood quantum is like a subtopic in that conversation. I'm lucky enough to be enrolled, and that makes me a dual citizen of White Earth Nation and the US, but a lot of people who are active in the community and hang on to cultural roots aren't enrolled for several different reasons. And there's a mean, disgusting history behind blood quantum. And hopefully with, I think you mentioned some changes, I think that there's going to be some state, like in Minnesota, some of the tribes are looking at updating some of those policies around blood quantum. And I have my personal opinions on how I view blood quantum, and we can get in, if anybody's interested in that, shoot me an email, definitely, and we can talk about that in depth. But yes, there's hopefully changes coming in the near future with blood quantum. And then your question was around terminology. Me and James have really good discussions in some of our meetings about what stereotypes, how we both move as Indigenous people throughout our lives and our professional lives. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were talking about racist idioms the other day.
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So I think talking about recruitment and then retention, I've been lucky enough in my professional life where I've not had too many super cringy workforce interactions, workplace interactions, but I think that in my personal life, I've seen a lot of those racist idioms, and I've used some unknowingly, right? So I just want to say the first things first, like, you don't know what you don't know. Right now we're at a day and age where we have like really cool social media influencers and really fun media outlets that are doing in-depth dives about what racism looks like day to day, right? So again, one of those big, huge topics of systematic, historic injustices, but then day to day, what does that look like, and how, as individuals, are we upholding those injustices, those systematic issues, right? And we can get into like different types of racist idioms.
Give some examples. Just, yeah.
So, okay, so I don't know if this is the best example because I don't know as much about it, but I've heard this a lot of times in corporate spaces. So climbing the corporate ladder and talking about the cutthroat, trying to get up and higher. And a lot of times that is equated to the phrase bottom of the totem pole or lowest rung on the totem pole, which when I hear that, it's a turn off. I'm immediately sick to my stomach. I think less of that person who said it in front of me. I've seen it in corporate places. I've seen it in academia, and I've seen it in museum studies. So I've seen it in these places that I thought were going to be safe spaces for me, and they're not. So one thing that when I hear that, I think about it, and I think that maybe it's a worldview difference. It's cultural appropriation. So it's definitely using this term, this image that is important to people, but then it's misappropriated in workplaces and talking about power dynamics where the foundation is usually the strongest part. So that's kind of where I want to be, right? And there's this worldview difference of like, oh, if you're at the top, you're the best, you are the most powerful, but you can't be, I don't know. That's one metaphor,
Yeah.
that's one cultural appropriation and misappropriation that it just sticks with me all the time. And it's a great example of cultural misrepresentation too, right?
Yeah. And a lack of
And
understanding and a lack of like really like wanting to understand, I think sometimes, like you don't have to get into it, but like, yeah, just this sense of like, that's yeah, that misunderstanding of how our of the culture itself is can show a real sense of lack of inclusion.
Well, and it's some of those things that are trending and I think generational. So using some other terms, and we could talk all day about racist idioms, but one thing that I think hopefully is going out of style now, but using animals, using people as indicators of personality traits and saying that so-and-so or this type of animal is my spirit animal. That's also like this huge thing where I hear that I'm like, I don't know if we can be friends anymore, right? Like, I don't know if I like trust you on this level. I automatically put up boundaries. And I think those are really these simple things that are socially acceptable in the Western world, right? But then creates this different dynamic when it's brought to Indigenous people in front of Indigenous people. And I'm going to keep saying this, and I will keep reminding everybody about this. The spectrum of Indigenous people, Indigenous identity is vast, it's complex. Some people who identify as natives, some people who have Native American heritage would potentially be fine with that term. I personally am not, and it is a turnoff for me. So just keep that in mind. Like, everything that you're hearing on this panel, everything that you could learn today will be different tomorrow and will be different for different people.
So that's a toughie. So how do we navigate that space then? Like,
Building relationships. It's easier said than done, but holding those relationships, building relationships with your Indigenous partners, your Indigenous peers, your Indigenous leaders and managers, your potential recruitments, your potential employees, treating people like people. I know it seems reductive saying it, but there is this level, and I think that I prioritize relationship building, and I think that relationship building is the only way to really understand a person's perspective and what they could or could not be okay with.
yeah.
And it's okay to ask, and then it's
Mhm.
okay to keep asking and say, hey, can you remind me of, whatever question that you have for that person?
We have centuries of misunderstanding. This isn't like a simple generational misunderstanding that started 5 years ago. And so it's not going to be easy, right? And it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but um, it's important. Those little idioms, those little microaggressions are so easily to sneak in and take you out of experiences. Like, I think I told you of an experience where um, I was in a meeting with somebody I very, very much respected. And she used the term drunk as an Indian. And it was a work meeting and no one caught it. And it was like, it was really damaging because this was a person I really respected. And I'm almost getting weepy thinking about it, just how like
When you
it
told me
took,
that, I was sick to my stomach. I was like, oh, that's,
it, it took me out, and
well,
then
and
you have a
then,
room full of people
yeah.
laughing at it. It's like, ugh.
And the and the dynamic, the situation that you were in, first of all, it was a one-on-one, very uncomfortable anyways. And then you're in a power dynamic in a work meeting where
You have
you
to kind of
bring it up, you
smile.
stop the meeting, you stop the day. Like, what are your options, right?
Yeah, yeah. What do I consider my future to be with this company? And is saying something going to put me in a position where I risk opportunity? So boy, this is a conversation I definitely want to take into our unplugged session because I think this is
Yeah.
practical stuff that we can talk about with regard to that idea of inclusion. And specifically and especially, how can we help people enter this space to get over some of these obstacles? I oftentimes think that Minnesota nice gets in the way and it stops us from behaving or acting in a certain way because we don't want to say the wrong thing. And so I think that having that conversation is going to be important. But I want to go to Ray. I think we have one opportunity for one question with you, Ray. Um, you are so passionate about veterans and Native American peoples and that intersection. Um, One word you use very often with the work that you do is empower. Can you talk about what that word means for you and for this population and how you empower veterans and specifically Native veterans?
I love that word, and that word applies everywhere. At work, when you recruit, when you hire, everything that you do, empower the people, bring the people with you, and it's important because you could do, for example, we would have a client from different background, and they need help with resume. We could do the resume for them and give them the resume, or we can actually walk them through the steps how to do their own resume. Spoon feeding is not good. That's what we were taught in the military. Uh, so teaching people, empowering them teaching them how to fish, all those things are important. And this doesn't matter what background. You come and talk to us. We're here to, it's important to know the capacity too. So I'm not going to ask you to do Six Sigma things if you're not Six Sigma certified or you don't know what Six Sigma is. You know what I mean? So it's important, like Hannah said, something very important, which is building relationships. How do you build the relationships? You don't just build the relationships, you establish important thing, which is trust. You don't have trust, the doors are closed in our brains. So our capacity to learn and everything is shut off. Now, trust can be established, but you have to do some things ahead of doing trust, which is study, learn the culture, learn, uh, tailor the message to that person that you're talking to. It could be a colleague, it could be an employee, anybody. Tailor that message to them. A client that comes to talk to us, they come from different levels. So we don't just give them the cookie cutter message or cookie cutter training. We actually sit down and talk to them first. We actually put aside what you're here for. Let me know about you. Tell me about you. Where you're from, what you do. Tell me about your service. Oh, you're a Native American. Great, wonderful. And you served in Army or Air Force or whatever. You served somewhere. And now showing a level of sincerity, asking the right questions, and questions have to be sincere. You can't just say, oh, thank you for your service. So tell me why you're here. Changing topic quickly. So there's a level of tone and a level of sincerity that needs to be established. And we recommend this to everybody, especially employers. You're on the go, your clock is ticking and you have a strategy to go, but we encourage that you dedicate some time to study that very well. Learn the culture, learn who you're talking to, build that strategy, and then when you're ready to deliver that message to that population you're targeting, specifically Native Americans or BIPOC or any community you're targeting, you got to know that community very well. And the community is different. I can just say, and based on the study, I think, how many is that 565 federally recognized American Indian tribal areas, governments in the United States? They're all just about, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember how many are currently.
In Minnesota, we have 11, right? Is it
Yeah.
11? So
Mhm.
nationwide, we have, and all these, each one is a different government, different culture,
Yes,
different
sovereign
language.
nation, right?
They're
Yeah.
all sovereign nation. And folks forget that. So
Yeah.
you got to think about that before you go. When you go to somebody's house, you got to, somebody welcomes you to their house, you got to respect them, respect how they do things and all that. And to me, that's where it's important to highlight that conversation, which is respect. And respect, not just to do it, you actually show respect and demonstrate that by commitment. And that commitment, elicit some of the things that, hey, we're here, we're with you, we're going to involve you in something here, and we would like your connection. I'm talking about tribal leadership, for example, tribal council, tribal subject matter experts. Talk to them, involve them, and have a conversation. And I can tell you, I did not know these things. I'm sure I've made some of my own mistakes, but I've worked with many people that actually set me straight. And Hannah said something, another thing that I really love, which is ask questions. Ask. It's okay. How do you, is this offensive to you? How do you like us to address you? How do you view this? We want to know your take on this. Please remind me again how is these things are done. So that's my perspective on that, and I learned it over the years. And I admit I was very ignorant, and I made my own mistakes. But you learn and you refine that and you build that relationship. But again, I want to highlight trust, rapport, and these two come before. But you have to be sincere and committed. Hopefully that I answered the question. I hope I didn't go off on a tangent, but these are very key things that I'd like to highlight.
I think it's an important point. I mean, knowing when you work with like native peoples and reservation peoples, you have to show up. And that doesn't mean you show up with, I think, I can't remember who I was talking to, but you don't show up with a stack of resumes in your hand. You show up for the powwow or the events and you have fun and you be part of the community because that part of the community is important. and you get to understand the people, right? Because that's another piece, just to touch on what we were talking about, Hannah, too, is kinship systems are so different, right? So our familial systems, how we interact with aunts and uncles, and how they relate to roles like fathers and mothers is completely different than more of the mainstream American culture. And understanding how that plays out, I think, is extremely important. But that doesn't come without questions because there's not a book, right?
Absolutely. And empowerment will not stick if you don't take care of those things I mentioned, the trust, rapport, honesty, and sincerity. All those things are
Yeah.
important. So you can bring great solutions, you have good intentions, but you're creating more issues for that to stick.
And we see that in businesses, right? If businesses
Yep.
can't create an environment of psychological safety for their employees, they're not going to get that whole employee. And just like I was saying, if I'm worried that my ethnic makeup is going to disallow me from having opportunities that other people have, I'm not bringing my whole self to work then, right? I'm bringing a fictionalized sense of myself so that I can have a sense of equity with regard to opportunities at work. So, oh man, all these questions, we could probably talk forever on all this stuff, but we're actually getting close to being out of time, believe it or not. We had one question per person, so this was obviously a really great conversation. But I want to take a few minutes here at the end to just start the unplug set before the unplug session to just summarize everything that we've learned up to this point. There seems to be a great opportunity to develop a pipeline of loyal, family-oriented, and service-minded team members by becoming an employer of choice for Indigenous Minnesotans. Minnesota has a rich Native American heritage in history and a thriving reservation ecosystems. We talked a little bit about the entrepreneurship experience that's happening, which is very exciting. And an organization that recognizes the strength that comes from both the urban and reservation experiences and explores ways to be welcoming and inclusive for Indigenous people will find a deep pipeline with loyal and committed members. We're going to go, and as you can see, we're sharing our email addresses with everybody. And I made sure and put Kirk's up there too, because he's an important part of this conversation also with an important voice. And so, again, I think I speak for everybody where if you want to continue this conversation with any of our guests, please reach out. Again, this is with regard to looking at this from a perspective of workforce. This might be an opportunity that hasn't been rightfully explored yet. And I think looking into opportunities to do this could have resounding impact beyond just the walls of your organization. And with that, I think I'll pass it on to, I think, Jessica Miller. Or Jella, you're closing us out, right? Before Unplugged?
Yes, I will go ahead and do that. Thanks, James. Great information. Very interesting conversation. Like you said, we could easily talk for another hour or two just on this conversation. And I think we all learned quite a bit from today. Feel free to join us. We will be doing unplugged version starting at 12 o'clock where you can ask more questions. We'll be doing that in a couple minutes. But again, we do have the survey out there. Fill that out. We are working on our 2023 calendar. So any employers or ideas that you have for us for 2023, please make sure to complete that survey. And for next month, what we will be talking about are statewide services and support for your businesses. And these are regional support and local support systems, as well as contacts for you to be reaching out to help develop and build your workforce. So that next event will be on December 7th. And the registration information is out there for you as well. And you can go to careerforcemn.com/workforce Wednesday to get more information on that as well. And we are at 11:58. We will go ahead and take a short pause. We thank you all. Here are all of our contacts for the state of Minnesota. We'll take a quick 1-minute break as we turn on all of the microphones and cameras for everybody and stop the recording. And we will then open it up, open forum for people to ask their questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.